All right, we've got a good amount of people here, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's second episode of State Policy Network's America's at its Best series. If you've joined us from your computer, you'll be able to type any questions you have throughout the call today to the Q&A button that's at the bottom of the Zoom screen. If you'd like to change your view, in the top right-hand corner, you'll see an option to change between speaker and gallery view. Gallery view will present our speakers today Brady Bunch style, as we like to say. You'll be able to see all the speakers at the same time. Speaker view will only show who's speaking in a larger screen view with our additional guests at the top of the screen. With that, I will turn it over to Rebecca Painter to get started.
Thank you, Alyssa. Hi, everybody. Welcome to America at its Best. As Alyssa said, this is our second episode. So thanks for being here today, and I'm glad to see you guys have returned for another show, and we've got some new faces in the audience today. So glad you're here with us. Little bit about why we're doing this show. For those of you who are new, I'm just tired of having the bejesus scared out of me every time I turn on the news. And that's what's been happening the last 6 weeks or so. I turn 38 years old tomorrow. And for those of you who are wondering, I'm not going to be like those memes who are sitting by themselves, hunched over a birthday cake with a lonely candle by themselves in a dark room. But I am going to be hunched over a birthday cake, probably in my pajamas, with my 11-month-year-old son and my husband, who I've spent probably the last 1,078 days with nonstop, or at least that's what it feels like. And it is a blessing and I love it. But that's just where we are. So all that to say, the reason we're doing this show today is very much because I've got to go into my 38th year focused on something positive and good. And so I wanted that for myself, and I figured you guys could probably use a little bit of that in your day as well. So thanks for being here with us today. We asked y'all to come back to us after last week and tell us about some topics you would like to dig into. And we heard a lot of feedback about how we really need to talk about the economy. And people are afraid to lean into this conversation to say, did we go too far? Was the shutdown too far, too fast? Did we have the right data to make the right decisions? And how are we going to make the right decisions moving forward? These are very difficult questions to answer. And I know even from talking with a lot of you guys that if you live in New York or in Louisiana, your view on this is very different than if you are living in my home state of South Carolina. So I know it's complicated. There's probably not one right answer, but we'll get into that a bit today and also hear from a couple of folks in Georgia and Pennsylvania who are working on ways to safely get people back to work. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first guest today, our fearless leader of State Policy Network, Tracy Sharp. Tracy, how are you doing? How's your family?
We're holding up just fine here, and we're keeping the fridge stocked. The neighbors, we've been coming together. We had a happy hour in the backyard last week. I think we're doing supper in the street soon because there's no one rolling down our street. And we're having a good time with our neighbors here in Berkeley. We find out that we have a lot in common, and we're watching out for each other. So it's been fun.
Good. Well, that's great. I know it's gone from kind of crazy and scary in California to it seems to be becoming the new normal and getting to a better place. So good. All right. Well, I'm just going to jump in then because this is the question I wanted to ask you since yesterday morning when I turned on the news. And the very first thing I saw was Governor Cuomo on the news, I'm not kidding, saying that the states created the federal government, not the other way around. I just couldn't believe I heard that. Soon after, I heard the news reporter talking about how the states in the Northeast are binding together to communicate and coordinate and talk about safe ways to reopen their economies, and that there are some states out west coming together to have these conversations and do the same thing. I was speechless. For so long, people who have dialed into this call and you and our guests on this call, this has always been our way of life and the way we've thought. Now we've got Governor Cuomo saying it. We've got people in some of the most liberal states in America buying into this. What do you make of that? And what do you think that means for this network?
Well, it's certainly interesting, right? 20 years ago, this network, it was like we were going out on a limb to quote the Constitution and that the states had a degree of powers to push back against the feds. Now we're finding that not just the governors of New York or California are listening, but decision makers, people are really hungry for these ideas because they're starting to understand in the midst of this crisis why the founders included those provisions in the first place, that the states would have a degree of sovereignty to push back and balance power against the feds. And rightly so, because these governors need to be relevant and responsive to the needs of the people in their state. It's something this network has understood really instinctively. It's in our DNA that to be relevant and responsive to the needs means you need to be closer to the action. Proximity matters. So I'm encouraged that federalism is making a comeback. I think it's important that we always put people first to really safely and carefully reopen the economy. And that's best done when power is balanced, because that's, we know that power can corrupt, and keeping an eye out for the people means we need to balance that power.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I can see too, where I remember back in 2009, I guess, 2010-ish, you'll know better than me. But I remember this network was very focused on the word transparency. And we spent a lot of time and energy and resources to have a more transparent government. And I'm just thinking back that if 10 years ago, it was such a win to get the word transparency on people's minds and lips. And now we've come all this way for, again, Governor Cuomo to be talking about federalism in this way is just really huge. And what an opportunity for all of us right now to help people. So congrats to you and your leadership and all the folks who are dialing in who have made this possible. Now, all that to say, you were talking about the focus on people, not politics. You had the opportunity to be a guest on Bill Walton's podcast yesterday, and he asked you to come on and talk a little bit about some of the impact that this network is making right now. And I can't get over how urgent and important this work is now, not just to all of us, but to just regular people and people in policy and politics. And they're so hungry for this stuff. So can you share a couple just big picture stories of impact that you shared with Bill Walton and give us an inside scoop on that before it airs? I just, again, going back to leaving people with some good news, I thought would be fun.
It was a lot of fun, right? We did, it was with Lawson Bader of Donors Trust to talk about their growth and resilience project. And that will air, I believe, tomorrow. So if people want to tune in, a couple points that were made is early on, this network leaned in and pivoted very quickly to expand healthcare access, which meant we need to get our ideas and our alternatives quickly into the right hands. And overall, 18 states and more than a handful of governors, even Colorado and Michigan, picked up these ideas that quickly expanded healthcare access, allowing equipment and doctors and resources to move across state lines. We see now that these ideas, when they were quickly implemented, have helped save lives. So we get accused of, there's this accusation floating around that, well, you put profits over people. No, we're putting people over the bureaucracy, over government power, right? It's people over politics in order to thoughtfully and carefully reopen the economy while we keep people safe. So we were able to hit on some of that in the podcast. I encourage you to listen in.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. We'll make sure we get everybody the link to that podcast after the show. Thank you. In fact, you just gave me a great lead to our next guest, Rob Arnott, People Over Politics. All right, Rob, just so you guys know, Rob's the guy I go to when I want to hear about finance or something to do with the economy. You might have seen him on CNBC or Fox News. He's definitely been published in the Journal through a variety of op-eds. Rob, thank you for being here with us today from Miami Beach. Now, I know it's tough probably for you right now. Your goodness knows what your view looks like. It might be empty, but I'm assuming it's beautiful. How are you and your family and life in Miami?
We're doing the best we can. I had the great fun of introducing my wife to the film Groundhog Day. If any of you haven't seen it in a long time, go take a look at it. It is so apropos of what we're dealing with today. It's hilarious and it's right on point. In front of me, yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, it is. In fact, that's one of my favorite movies, and I was very young when it came out, and my best friend at the time, since I was 10 years old, she's still my best friend today, we've seen that movie at least 25 times, and we call each other every day, and we're saying, it's still Groundhog Day, so I get it. I get it. So speaking of Groundhog Day and the repeat, have we seen anything like this throughout our history?
short answer is no. Take a look at this next exhibit.
Okay.
This exhibit shows weekly initial unemployment claims. We had claims of 3 million a couple weeks back, then 7 million the next week, then 6.6 the next week. God only knows what's going to be reported tomorrow, but estimates range from 3 to 7 million. That adds up to 20 million people. And you look at the history of this is a 50-year history. So when we say that we're in unprecedented times, we have never, ever shut down the macroeconomy for any sort of crisis, not the pandemic of 1918 and 19, not World War I, World War II, certainly not the global financial crisis, which is that small uptick on the right third of the chart. This is without precedent. And the next exhibit shows you, gives you a hint of what's coming. The March payrolls dropped 701,000, one of the largest in history. World War II shutting down military production at the end of World War II was a one-off. 2 million people out of work released by the government to the private sector. In the private sector, you can see the spikes afterwards, put those people back to work pretty darn fast. 700,000 lost. What about the 20 million since this survey was done? And the survey was done March 12. And
Wow.
Since then, we've put 20 million people out of work. So the next report, which is coming up in about 2-3 weeks, is going to be 20 million net jobs lost, which on that last chart is it's off the chart on the downside. The scale goes to -2 million. It's going to need to go to -20 million. Unemployment rate, biggest 1 month uptick in history. That's a blip. That's nothing. This next month, we're going to see it go from 4.5% to 15% in a single month. The next month after that, from 15 to 20-ish. And these are round numbers, but they're approximately right. That's without any precedent since the Great Depression. So we've deliberately and consciously put tens of millions of people out of work in an effort to contain a health crisis that is a health crisis, but a health crisis that is probably at worst 3 to 5 times as bad as seasonal flu. So did we do the right thing? I don't think so, but I'm not a policymaker. The next 3 slides show the market's reaction. First, the stock market, unprecedented drop. Well, yes, but the gray lines here show the last 50 years trajectories. You can see a lot of big drops in there. And so 30% in 3 weeks, that's without precedent from a market high. It's not that unusual at the bottom, at the end of a major bear market. So the market's reaction was big, but the market is basically saying, this crisis is going to pass. We're going to be starting to get back to work next month. We're going to be right back on track by around the end of the year. I'm not so sure that we can put Humpty Dumpty back together again that fast. I think there's a good chance it'll take 2 to 4 years to get back to the GDP levels we had just 8 weeks ago. The bond market's reaction on the next exhibit, also without precedent in terms of volatility. Those are huge swings, 10 percentage point swings in a single day. This is enormous volatility, but the magnitude of the overall move, yes, it's without precedent on this short a time, but it's not wildly without precedent. It's just moderately out of bounds. So the bond market's reaction is, this is going to be worse than the stock market thinks, but the bond market also is picturing a world past the COVID crisis. There's countless charts like this. Oil is the next one, and oil is indeed off the charts, losing 2/3 of its value in 3 months. Most of that drop in 3 weeks. As of the last week or so, there have been parts of the oil market that are down over 100%, meaning that the oil producers have to pay people to take the product, not receiving anything for it at all. These are unprecedented times, and the big question is, are the markets looking past this a little too soon? I don't know, obviously, but I lean towards the view that we've seen the first round of a market reaction, but not the last.
Okay. So, as you mentioned, it's hard to say, did we do the right thing? Did we not do the right thing? I'm not a policy analyst either. These are unprecedented, uncertain times. But it is interesting to learn more about how other countries are faring by using different strategies. Can you talk to me a little bit about what you've seen from how other countries are handling things differently and what their results have looked like?
Absolutely. I think the model for our behavior ought to have been, and it's not too late, we could still follow this path, but ought to have been the East Asian model. The East Asian economies, including the democracies, let's set aside totalitarian dictatorships, democracies like Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, they all responded to this faster than we did by saying, let's deploy the military, let's deploy the police to remotely take people's temperatures on the way into office towers, apartment blocks, shopping centers. If you've got a fever, pull them aside and test them.
Mm-hmm.
If they test, they are put on mandatory home quarantine if they have a fever until the results come back. If the results are positive, they find out who they met with in the prior 10 days, they go test them. Anyone
and now, wait 1 second. Rob, I've known you a while. I know you're very, very, very much a limited government kind of guy who really values his personal space. So are you saying, from your perspective, your philosophy is very libertarian, right? Are you saying that you would have been okay with that?
Absolutely. I'm a huge proponent of human liberty, human freedom. But the notion that you have the freedom to knowingly pass on a lethal pathogen to your fellow citizen is preposterous. And the notion that the state shouldn't say, no, you stay home. If you leave your apartment in the next 3 weeks, it's a $10,000 fine. Something serious enough to make people sit up and take note. If that was done, then what happens is it takes probably 3 weeks before this remote temperature testing identifies pretty much everyone in the country who's carrier. And the lockdown takes about 3 or 4 weeks before everyone is done with the disease, hopefully getting better, but in some cases not. So you're looking at 6 or 8 weeks start to finish. And that was the East Asian experience, country by country by country.
Wow.
Last Friday, which is the last day I checked, the 4 countries, Singapore, Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea, collectively, the 4 countries had 11 deaths. 11 deaths. So could we have done this? Yes. Could we still do it? I don't see anyone saying, let's deploy the National Guard to take people's temperature. What are we paying these guys for if we aren't willing to use them for a national emergency?
Interesting. And I know you've also looked at other impacts, not just economic, but a friend of mine recently said, I wish I'd become a divorce attorney because I think we're going to see business. What are the other things that are going to be happening, trends coming out of this?
Yeah. People say it's heartless to put the economy first and to worry about the shutdown. Look at the human toll of the COVID virus. Look at the human toll of the shutdown. Divorces, every 1,000 additional unemployed corresponds to 1 additional suicide and 70 to 100 new divorces. 20 to 40 new addicts and 2 to 3 drug overdoses. There's a link. Not only that, but if you disrupt the supply chains, there's 70 million people in the United States with heart or lung disease, with cancer or diabetes. Those 70 million people, if they can't get their meds, they can die. If they can't get a hospital bed when they need it, they can die. So COVID is likely to kill somewhere in the neighborhood of 100,000 or 200,000 people. That's about twice as bad as a bad year for flu. the economic shutdown, I would venture to guess, will kill multiples of that number. And every passing week that businesses are shuttered makes it that much harder for them to reopen. So putting Humpty Dumpty back together again gets harder and harder and harder. And that's the issue that I think is devastating here. I think the economy will not get back on track this year. I think it'll take 2 to 4 years for it to get back on track, given the magnitude, scale, breadth, and depth of this shutdown.
So since I've got you, I'm going to ask for some free financial advice. You're talking about 2 to 4 years. My husband and I took a tremendously huge chunk of our savings because we felt like we saved a lot of money and we were very proud of ourselves. This was about 3 or 4 weeks before the COVID shutdown hit. And we started a college savings account for the baby, which we could have waited, but we thought, we've got it, let's do it. Oh, we're so great, we're so smart. Now it shot up, and now it's shot way below the value that it was before we put it in there. So what's happening to my money?
Forget the value that you put in there. There's something in investing called a sunk
That's
cost.
hard.
Whatever's gone down has gone down. Forget about what the price used to be. What the price is what matters. You're not going to need that money in the next year, so I wouldn't worry about it. I wouldn't even bother looking at it more often than once every year or two.
So eventually it'll go up again. That's your eventually.
You set money aside, you do it on a systematic basis. Some of it you buy low, and that does well. Some of it you buy high, that doesn't do well. And it averages out over the long, by the time your child is ready for college, it's going to be worth considerably more than what you put into it. Almost no matter what trajectory happens along the way from here to there. People who need their money in the next 5 years, they have reason to be concerned. People who need it 10, 20 years from now, not so much.
Well, you've made me feel just a little bit better now. And a lot of what you said was actually a bit daunting, but that's why we've got other folks on the show to talk about, where we are now, which is what you said, versus where we're headed. And before we get there, I do want to bring it back to you for a second, Tracy, because I think Rob did a really good job of explaining where we are. Really interested hearing what other countries have done that have been effective. I think as you see 64 think tanks across all 50 states start to come together to advise their governors on what is going to be best for their economy, you're going to have a wide variety of different viewpoints. I'm sure that some are going to say reopen tomorrow, and others might be more cautious. New York, again, is going to be very different than a state like South Carolina. Tracy, how is State Policy Network in this network taking an approach to make sure that we're not having a knee-jerk reaction, and where are we making sure we've got the right information and data to make these decisions and provide this counsel, because it's a very heavy responsibility on our shoulders right now.
For sure, it's showing the value of the network, the power of the network, and SPN to collect and connect all this information out to the practitioners so they can weigh it in the balance, so they can make informed decisions for what's best for their state. At the end of the day, the data has been inconsistent and is incomplete. So the best we can do is for today to get the info that the practitioners, that our affiliates need out on the front lines, so that they can be relevant and responsive. And that's why I'm looking forward to hearing what's happening in Pennsylvania and in Georgia, because really the network effects of all this information being gathered in some of the central hubs that we've set up online, where a lot of these state think tank CEOs are engaging and sharing info, can really help equip our CEOs out in the states.
Okay, great. Well, let's move to Pennsylvania then, and our friend Charles Mitchell, who's the CEO of Commonwealth Foundation. Hi, Charles. Welcome to the show.
You should all absolutely move to Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for saying that, my friend in South Carolina. I knew you were smart.
Well, I don't know. I might move to your house. If I remember correctly, you're now working in a space full of women with your many young daughters and your wife. So you're very outnumbered, but I think that's probably good for you to be out of the office and working from home.
And I have a full liquor cabinet and lots of guns. So what's not to like?
Oh, okay. That's exciting and scary all at the same time. All right. So Charles, tell us a little bit about Pennsylvania. I'm not super familiar with the lay of the land there. Has your governor been good on this? Has your governor made sensible reforms? I'm assuming not by your face.
Yeah, the truth is, our governor's name is Tom Wolf. He and I are not best friends. Unfortunately, he's actually been ranked the most liberal governor in America. But having said that, from the beginning of this whole thing, I've been rooting for him because I think we're all rooting for our governors, whoever they are, whatever their party is, because this is a global crisis. And we're relying upon them to make good, and I would also say the word that you said earlier, Rebecca, transparent decisions about how to help people. I mean, that's really what this is about, and my daughters, Rebecca, you mentioned my 4 daughters. I can tell you about the governor, but I want to tell you about my daughters for a minute here. My daughters have actually helped me really think about this crisis, believe it or not. Tracy mentioned earlier that we're fighting for people. Well, I have this other woman I live with. Some of you know her name's Alexa. My children like to talk to her a lot. So one of their favorite quarantine things is, Alexa, play We Are the Champions by Queen. And you guys know, you know the song, We Are the Champions. Yes. And first, I think it's great that my daughters have such fine taste. But I also have taken to telling my colleagues at the Commonwealth Foundation that Queen has it right. We are the champions. We're the champions for people, as Tracy said, and more particularly in our context in Pennsylvania, we're the champions for workers and for kids. And workers in particular are some of the people that are getting screwed by the decisions that our governor has unfortunately started to make. He imposed one of the most opaque. He didn't ask anybody's advice. He didn't talk to any stakeholders, any legislators before putting in a slipshod shutdown of parts, but not all, of our economy. And
give me some examples of parts, but not all. What kind of stuff did he toss out there?
I mean, lots of governors, for example, have used federal guidelines to decide which things can stay open, which are essential to, the national security or whatever, which aren't. Our governor made up his own. So the best example I can give you is this. There's a gentleman who lives in my area, name is Tom Slattery. His wife is just finishing up chemotherapy. Mr. Slattery and his wife are going to be homeless in June because of the way our governor went about this, because he shut down, among other things, residential construction because it's not life-sustaining. Well, Mr. Slattery and his wife would beg to differ because they sold their home so they could move into a 55-plus community. They have to close on their current home. They have to give it up. They have to move out. And they're going to have nowhere to go. And they are the textbook of the most vulnerable. She's immunosuppressed, and they are elderly. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Another quick example, Rebecca, our governor shut down a business that some of our listeners today probably heard of. It's called Channellock. They make the best pliers in America. And of course, they make them in Pennsylvania. They have 300 and some union employees, which a Democratic governor would say those are his people. Well, not so much. They wanted to work. They can work safely, but they all had to go home. And by the way, you can't make ventilators without pliers. I don't know if anybody ever thought of that in the governor's office, which is why it's such a problem that he and a handful of bureaucrats dreamed up this scheme and like you asked about, shut down parts of the economy without a good strategy, without transparency, and it's been deeply, deeply, deeply destructive.
So it sounds like your governor is thinking about essential versus non-essential in very weird ways, but also, and you and Randy both said this to me recently, that it's really about how to get people back to work in the safest possible ways. Can you go back to work in a safe environment, or is it unsafe? And so it sounds like Commonwealth has done some very specific work on helping these businesses reopen. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? And at the same time, I want to also, as you're saying that, because I think that you'll help answer some of this question, big shout out to Martin Payer, who submitted a question before the show asking how we can help companies by removing restrictions on their operations, which I think is what you're probably getting at with what you're doing. So if you could feed that into your answer, it would help us.
Sure. Yeah, we've really worked on 2 tracks. First, obviously, we're a policy organization. So we wrote legislation that would fix this politically driven slipshod process. The governor has instituted this way of getting what's called a waiver if you're shut down, but you think that you shouldn't be. Shockingly, his former business has a waiver. They make cabinets. I don't really know why we need cabinets right now, but I mean, I'm okay with cabinets. President of our Senate has the president pro tem has a candy business. They got a waiver. I guess we all need our candy. I mean, who can argue with that? I don't know.
We do need our candy.
But,
I have to tell you. We do.
So we've helped legislators write a bill to fix the process, drawing on lessons from other states. Some of the lessons, first of all, use the federal guidelines. That's sort of a no-brainer. Another way to do it in other states is in other states, companies can designate other companies that are essential to their being able to do business rather than waiting for a bureaucrat to do it. But the other piece, the other track that we've gone down, Rebecca, and I think this is something that people will be interested in, is helping the individual businesses navigate this morass. Of course, we're working to change the morass, but we can also help them navigate it while it exists. We don't have
Yeah,
to
because regular people do not have time, myself included, to read all the government gobbledygook, whatever language their stuff is in. And listen, I know I'm blind, but I'm not stupid. I understand things. They make
we already
it very,
established that. You told everybody to move to Pennsylvania.
there you go. It's very confusing, especially when you're busy and you're worried about your business. So it sounds like the fact that Commonwealth Foundation, who you guys have always been so focused on helping people through your policy, that you are now moving into a space where nobody else was, to be sort of a translator for these businesses so they know what the heck they can and can't do, and then you're advocating for them. Is that?
And if they can't do what they need to do, we help them fix it. So for example, I told you about those 300 and some union jobs that were lost at the hand tools manufacturer at Channel Lock. Well, as we sit here today, Channel Lock is back open because we worked alongside them, and we're working at this very moment alongside many other businesses to help them navigate this process, to help them engage elected officials who have clearly made a bad decision, but there is a mechanism to fix it. So let's help them use the mechanism as effectively as possible. And I got to tell you, Rebecca, I mean, we've traveled around Pennsylvania a little bit together. Haven't been successful in getting you to move, but I'm going to stay on it. I often walk factory floors. I know the people at Channel Lock. Their president used to serve on our board, and it just kills me to think of those people who want to work. I don't believe in making people do things that are unsafe. None of us believe that. Right. But when there are places where people can work and they can work safely and they want to, it's criminal. I mean, I shouldn't even use that word because it's what the government is doing is making it criminal to work. And that's wrong. It's immoral. And that's why I say we are the champions for these workers. They want to work. They want to do their job. And also, obviously, we need ventilators. So we need pliers. Another example in PA, I'll give you one more. The governor shut down initially he shut down all the payroll companies. Well, how do you think nurses get paid? So we helped before he changed his order for everybody. We helped payroll company that got all the the nurses in a certain area of Pennsylvania paid. That's what I mean when I say we're the champions for workers, and they need it.
Charles, do you
let me say something, Pam. I really appreciate these examples because it just shows how much of this network we're willing to work with anyone for the sake of the people, for workers, to help them in your prospective state. And it doesn't matter whether it's Democrat, Republican, whoever's going to help get the job done. I really appreciate those examples. Sorry, Rebecca, go ahead.
No, that's good. Jump in anytime. And Charles, I think it's just so cool to have seen the evolution of Commonwealth over the years. And again, for those of you who don't know, I started out working for politicians in South Carolina, realized that politicians was gross. Well, not politics, politics was gross, sorry. Politics, didn't like it, but I liked policy and I got into this world. So I've been in this world a long time. And I remember over a decade ago when it was Commonwealth Foundation. And now Charles has helped build up allied organizations, because you've got to have more than just one think tank in a state if you're really going to have this kind of change. And Charles, I really commend you for having now different arms, between litigation centers and investigative reporting and grassroots arms and whatnot, to be able to come alongside you at a time like this and get things done. Because I think it really shows how you guys can be nimble and evolve with the needs of the times. Because I'm imagining that as you guys have turned into both the translator for what the heck the government is trying to pull over some of these businesses, also, you're continuing to get the policy in the right hands and make life better for your Pennsylvanians. And I'm sure you've got all kinds of litigation going on in other areas, which we'll have to save for another show. I know you've got a lot of demands now coming from this new piece of helping the businesses and the people who are in them. So I just really want to say thank you and commend you on that.
Well, thanks, but I need to take a minute and say thank you because the other people who are on this call are the ones who've made this network possible. And a couple quick things about that. First of all, I mean, this network recruited me to Commonwealth. I was in Washington, D.C. 10 years ago, and SPN actually paid my salary the first year so that Commonwealth could expand and bring this punk from D.C. aboard. And also, SPN has really been critical in coming alongside Commonwealth, a think tank, right? And not only helping us grow, but helping us understand that we needed to start what we call allied organizations, other capacities. And I'll tell you, this impact that we've had on behalf of these workers, for example, over the last 3-4 weeks, it's incredibly meaningful to me personally to help those people. It's also incredibly meaningful to me because I know it wouldn't be happening if not for our allied organizations, specifically one started by a guy a number of you know, Matt Briette, who runs Commonwealth Partners, which is a 501c6 and has become the largest by far organization in Pennsylvania dedicated to doing something the Commonwealth Foundation can't do, which is putting good people in office who espouse our values. So who do you think the legislators are who are the prime sponsors of all the stuff that I'm talking about? Who do you think the legislators are who are rallying the leading policymakers to get these businesses back open? I mean, they're the people that Matt and his team got in there. So yeah. we are, I appreciate your thanks, but it's for me to thank SPN because to whatever degree you hear things that you like on this call and that encourage you that we really can fight and win and be champions for workers. It's not because I'm a rocket scientist, I'm not. It's because we in Pennsylvania have had SPN come alongside us and help us adopt this model of work that is paying huge dividends.
Well, we appreciate that. And that goes back to all the folks who were on the call who made that possible. And Tracy's the mastermind behind some of our bigger investments. And I'm sure she had a lot to do with making that call to pay your salary that first year and get you in that position. Tracy, do you think that's a good investment now that you're looking at the return all these years later?
Oh, it's been a huge return on investment. Charles is a great example and an inspiration. So we're grateful that he's at the helm in Pennsylvania, and God bless him.
Yeah, well, leaders in this network make all the magic happen. So before we go on to our next leader, Randy Hicks, I just want to take a moment. Rob has to leave in a couple of minutes. So I just wanted to make sure that both our guests who are watching the show and the guests who are on the show, if you guys had any last questions for Rob before he has to disappear on us in a few minutes, I just wanted to give you guys the opportunity.
Or they could type them in the Q&A. He has to leave at 45 after, so.
Yes.
While we're waiting for notes to be typed in, just a couple of quick observations. The nature of politics is one of completely ignoring unintended consequences. I think your example of shutting down payroll businesses, good Lord, that's going to shut down all businesses. What are they thinking? And to ignore an unintended consequence as simple as that. I also read a statistic the other day that was quite alarming. It said that 88% of all blondes are going to be gone by the end of this crisis. And my wife is one of those, and she's not blonde anymore. And it's very disturbing. We should be very wary about these unintended consequences.
You know, Rob, I was very blonde, and then I had a baby, and now I'm going, it's getting darker by the day, so riddle me that, I don't know. I will tell you that Martin Payer actually put something in this Zoom chat, which I really appreciated, from Sioux Falls. And he talked about how, there was some swine slaughtering, that'll be a tongue twister, that was operating, and now there's 600 cases related to that plant. The medical community doesn't know how to stop the spread, and it just seems like people are struggling to find safe ways to reopen society. And Martin, your question makes a lot of sense. Why can't we learn from those who are doing better? And I think that's the larger point, right? Like,
I've heard endless talk from both parties about the need to reopen the economy. But I've heard no talk about why don't we deploy police and National Guard to office towers and shopping centers and take people's temperature remotely? Shouldn't that be step one? We have those resources. That would cost a few billion, not a few trillion. And we can do that, we should do that, but I have heard nobody talk about it.
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge to balance our civil liberties and safety and reopen the economy. This is what this network is really looking and scanning the horizon for all kinds of data and info and intel to help us make these very difficult decisions, some of which require trade-offs. And it's different in every state too, which is why making the decisions closer to home is more effective.
Yeah.
I love
Thank
going
you.
out for dinner. I would feel a lot happier about going out to restaurants again if somebody was standing there taking temperatures.
And again, to hear that view from Rob is a bit shocking. I know some folks probably are cringing, others maybe like it, but it's good to hear a wide variety of ideas because we've got to get everything on the table and figure out what's best for each state. So thank you, Rob. Thanks for that comment too, Tracy. Now I want to move on to another leader of our network, Randy Hicks. Randy's coming from Georgia. He's the CEO of the Georgia Center for Opportunity. And Randy, I just got to tell you, I thought life was hard for me right now because my husband's underfoot trying to learn how to work from home. He's not very good at it. And again, the baby's here and the baby's very needy. So I thought, well, it was me, right? But I hear that you've got like 5 kids in your house, an 18-month-old and a dog, and yet you're still with us. So that's interesting.
Yeah, so 5 kids are here. My wife, we have 4 pets, and periodically 2 or 3 times a week, we have an 18-month-old who comes with us because she has 2 parents who both have jobs that were deemed essential. And so she's like our grandchild. She's not, but she's like that. And so we watch her, and it's a crazy fun household for the most part. Feel badly for my wife mostly because she has worked remotely for a couple of years. She comes down every day, steps into her office and says, why are all these people still here? But
yes.
We're navigating it well. It's fun. It's an interesting journey.
Good. Well, we talked a little bit earlier with Charles about his model with the allied organizations. And I also want to note how you have really changed the way this network thinks about our work. Spoiler, left the network actually for just a couple of years to go work at a university that means a lot to me. And in the short time I left to the time I came back, it seemed like the think tank community had evolved leaps and bounds from where I left it. And a lot of that had to do with you, Randy. And it happened as soon as I called you to say, what's new in Georgia? And you told me the story about how you got this big policy passed and you were congratulating yourself because, oh, we passed a policy. And then you woke up in the middle of the night realizing a policy passed is no good if the people whose lives it will impact most don't know about it. And it changed the way you do everything. And then you went on to tell me later, just 1 week actually before all this COVID hit, we were sitting there chatting and you said, I used to think that we were a policy organization that helps civil society, but over time I've realized that we are a civil society organization that helps people through policy. And you've just really changed the way we've looked at this. Gone are those wonky days. Now are the days where we really are understanding why our work matters. So talk to me a little bit about COVID and what that means for your organization, how you guys went from being a think tank to being out there in the community.
Yeah, well, Rebecca, you did a great job kind of setting all that up. I think what we recognize is what everybody on this call recognizes is that lives are lived in communities. They're lived in our homes, in our neighborhoods. They're lived in our communities of faith. They are lived in workplaces, right? That's where jobs are created and jobs are secured. And so we really wanted to come to better understand actually how things happen on the ground and make sure public policy doesn't get in the way of that. And so, now we're about removing barriers. What are the barriers to opportunity that need to be removed at the public policy level? And then at the community level, while we don't do direct services, we organize leaders to think about policies, barriers that can be removed locally. And basically what we tell them, it's kind of like what we state leaders tell people is don't wait for the federal government to act. You can do it at the state level. Where we tell people locally, don't wait for the state to act. There are things you don't have to wait to be done to have an impact on your community, to create jobs, to create stable families, all those kinds of things. So that's what we do now.
So you're essentially bringing together community leaders in all facets to come together to solve problems without the government helping, not just policy organizations.
That's right. So one big issue, and this will take us right into COVID, one big issue we've been working on for a couple years now has been employment, and very specifically designing a way that nonprofits and businesses can work together to identify the chronically un- and underemployed, get them trained and get them into the workforce. Well, we've been working on that with unemployment rates under 4%, right? Well, now suddenly with COVID, those unemployment numbers, as Rob said, have exploded, and they're likely to continue to increase. And those aren't just numbers. And we talk about this as a team. Those are people. We see numbers, we see trend lines. Those are individuals whose lives have been so disrupted, people who are truly suffering because of lost work. And so what we did kind of as soon as basically these restrictions were put into place and sectors started to shut down, we started first convening via biweekly phone calls, conversations between business leaders and nonprofits, and where they could share ideas, they could exchange notes, learnings, things like that, where they could learn more, for instance, about the Paycheck Protection Program and all those kinds of things that they were all trying to understand. And good things have come out of that because they're talking with each other and sharing ideas, and even nonprofits are doing a better job in this network of raising money to be more effective in providing services to the people that they were designed to serve.
So then, Brandy, have you guys, as you came together, did you come up with a way to try and figure out how to get people back to work without continuing to rely on the government?
Yes. And in fact, again, we were working on employment issues with, 3.1% unemployment at the end of February, I believe. That's not the situation now. And so we have a lot of groups, because of our work that we've done in the past in communities around the state, reaching out to us and saying, all right, we're really concerned. We have all these people who are newly unemployed, but interestingly enough, they're also saying there are some jobs that can be filled, hundreds of them, not too far from my home, as a matter of fact. And so it's how do we identify these people and move them along? So a group in Gwinnett County, which is our second highest populated county, contacted our group. They weren't people we didn't know. We've known them. They're strategic partners. And so we launched an initiative on Monday of this week, so just 2 days ago, where we have the groups working together. We have the housing authority, so we don't have a government agency looking to us for help, because they recognize it's a private sector actually that will get people back to work. And they're using a jobs portal that we created that allows businesses and nonprofits to intersect, and to intersect as well with job seekers, where we can track how people are entering this collaborative effort and see how they're doing along the way, track results, track what jobs they get, how long they stay in jobs. So we've taken that and started it Monday in Gwinnett County.
Wow. So how are you guys making sure that people who are looking for jobs know about this database portal website?
Yeah, so we're relying heavily on the direct service providers. They're the ones who are being contacted by people in need. So they're the ones who are going to serve as kind of the ones pointing people toward it. At the same time, we are doing some marketing, but primarily people are in need and they're reaching out for people who can help them. And that's how they're going to learn about it.
Great. So, and I assume you're tracking this, so you can report back to us in a few weeks and let us know how many jobs you filled?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, right away, we were, they had, within an hour or two of announcing the formation of this, they had 100 individuals and 60 families essentially virtually knocking at the door, not in person. We are socially distancing, And we now understand that they've just been inundated over the past couple of days since we announced this.
Randy, thank you. Thank you for getting people off of unemployment. That is awesome. Giving them opportunities, getting things going. That's amazing. I love that story. Thank you. All right. Now here's a question. We had a couple of questions from our folks who wrote in before the show started. And Randy, I want to send this one to you and also invite Charles and Tracy if you guys would like to comment on this as well. Ed Johnson, thank you for submitting your question. Ed wanted to know, what are some of the ways that we can reduce the regulatory burdens that are suddenly on businesses? And how do we make sure that when we implement these policy changes that they're lasting and they're not just these short-term one-offs in light of the crisis, which is a bit of a shift from what we were talking about, but I know that that's in your minds as you guys are moving forward.
Well, the first thing I'll say is vigilance is going to be required because things can be changed so quickly. But I want to make a very important point here. And I'm not, I don't want to sound negative. I'm going to make an observation and then talk about where I think we need to go to remove these regulations. I saw a report or a list of recommendations made recently by a conservative organization, and it was kind of a laundry list of regulations that need to be listed, budgets, various governmental budgets that need to be cut. And to me, it sounded perhaps just a little tone deaf to the moment. I think the way we're going to lift regulations is by being laser focused on job-related regulations. Any regulations that get in the way of people re-entering the workforce. That might be occupational licensing, but it could also be burdensome regulations on specific businesses in specific sectors. So I think it's very important that we seize the moment in the right way and talk about people, because ultimately, Charles has talked about it, Tracy's talked about it, you've talked about it on this call. We've all talked about people affected by this. And the way we'll win is not by putting together our laundry list of things we want, but by staying focused on the opportunity in the moment, which is to tie business regulations to human well-being, for good or for bad.
Yeah, very well said.
And
Charles, do you have something to add?
Oh, you can always count on me to double down on what a smart person says. So I'll double down on what Randy said. Look, I think if there's nothing else that anybody takes away from this call, it's this. Randy said it, but I'll say it a little differently. Our work has never been more crucial than it is right now. You can see that in what Randy just said, and also in the efforts that his organization has deployed. Hopefully you heard a little bit about it in terms of just a little bit that we talked about earlier about Commonwealth, but also this question is critical. And I would argue there are a number of things that the government has been doing for the last several decades, not just business regulation, but other regulations. So for example, regs that keep doctors from being able to practice medicine in a different state who want to, Tracy talked a little bit about that, about some of the regulations that even governors like the one I'm dealing with have suspended, that people now think, oh, that's crazy. Why'd we do that? Well, part of our job, part of why our work is so urgent is now that people see that, let's make sure that victory is permanent, as the questioner said. But I would also say this is how it happens in America. These things happen, and all of a sudden what seemed crazy is inevitable, right? And we could all think of some issues where that's occurred. I think as we look around right now, systems and especially bureaucracies that people have relied upon for decades and that have seemed like invulnerable fortresses that we could never get into are now exposed. In Pennsylvania, part of it is, our state liquor stores. And now everybody's like, well, why do we need those? They're not open. They don't serve us, right? More importantly, schools, right? I mean, how many?
Wait a second. Can we just park on that for a second? Did everybody hear that Pennsylvania has state liquor stores? I just wanted to make sure everybody, and I know that there are more serious issues at play here, but I just wanted to make sure people get that that's happening. Okay.
But you know what? Like, this is something people have been writing think tank papers about for a long time.
I know.
And it has, and we've made some progress, right? But like now, all of a sudden, it doesn't sound quite so crazy when these stores, like they're the only, there's lots of stores that have figured out how to be open. These people, they're not open. They don't have curbside pickup. They don't have anything, right? But look, let's pick a more important one, right? What about schools? How many people would have said a year ago, oh, you can't do school online? You can't do that. Technology, yeah, I use an iPhone, but you can't do school that way. Well, what happened now? All of a sudden, those of us who have been proponents of, for example, cyber schools for many years, we don't sound so crazy anymore. I think there's abundant opportunities like that to lock in not just policy change, but culture change. The people's perception of what's normal or what's possible or what can be done or whatever is radically shifting around us. And that's why I say our work has never been more urgent than it is now. I think there's abundant, yes, of course, there are terrible things going on we have to deal with. And I laid out a whole bunch of them earlier, right? I think there's also an incredible opportunity that our movement and our network have to seize. And I believe we are seizing it. We're going to continue to seize it.
You know,
Thank
what
you.
Charles is describing is the Overton window, right? That window of what is politically possible is shifting. So we have a moment in time where a gap has opened. And I am so proud of this network because it is so big swaths of this network have pivoted so quickly to address human need, to address and mitigate the suffering. And in the process, we have the opportunity of shifting the Overton window in areas of online education, on deregulation of healthcare access. So we're charging ahead full steam. And I think our two speakers today really hit it on the head.
I do too. Thank you. I really appreciate you guys all being here. And I think, Tracy, that you set the right tone with what you said early in the show, which was this is about people over politics. And that went through everybody's answers to the questions I asked. And that's what will be the guiding force for this network as we move forward. I also just want to reiterate something else that you said, which is every state is different. And the way this economy starts to reopen and the way the network will look at it will depend state by state as we continue to get our hands on the right kind of data to inform those decisions. So it's not, unfortunately, as easy as saying, hey, this is the magic bullet that I know we'd all like to have. So we'll continue to be very intentional and thoughtful. So in closing to our second show, we heard some really dark news, I think, from Rob with his slides, but that was balanced by the good news because something can be done about it and is being done. And that wouldn't be done without all of you who are on the show. You guys have been partners for this network. You've made all of this possible. We're going to keep bringing you some good news every single week. I hope the show continues long after COVID's out of our hair because I think it's a lot of fun. And, again, we miss you guys. We want to be with you in your living rooms and at your businesses, and we can't right now. So this is our best way of getting to you and hearing from you. So please let us know what else you want to hear about next week. And before I say goodbye, Randy wants to say one more thing. So we're going to give you the floor to close this week, Randy.
Well, one other thing, and this is a tribute again to Tracy and the team and to people like Charles and others across the country. I've mentioned this recently in a couple of conversations. I'll say it here. In the ancient Greek language, there are two words for time, chronos and kairos. Chronos is chronological time. Kairos is a moment in time. It's an opportune time. Opportune times are not always planned for. They just come. But what's important is that all the work that's been done in chronological time suddenly is extremely relevant in that opportune moment, in that kairos moment. And so what I'd say is, while none of us would have chosen this, the reality is that all the work Tracy and her team have done, the work Charles has been doing in Pennsylvania and other think tanks across the country have been doing, we're kind of geared up for this time. This should be our best moment in a lot of ways. And I don't mean that as some sort of crass opportunism. I'm talking about kind of Winston Churchill when he became prime minister saying, I feel as if my whole life prepared me for this moment. He didn't want World War II, but he got World War II and he felt prepared for it. We're prepared for this. And this is a time to double down on our work. And I feel like our whole team is leaning forward, and people on this call, I see everybody leaning forward as well, who I can see anyway. We're excited about where we are, not because of the hurt, but because of the responsibilities we have.
Well, Randy, thanks to you and Charles and everybody else in those 64 groups across the state and everybody who makes this work possible. I'm going to turn 38 years old tomorrow, which my friend told me is actually called a rocket ship to 40. I'm okay with that. And I'm going to be positive and feel good about it and not worry about all this COVID crazy, because you're right. We are ready, and thank goodness, because if not, I don't know where we'd be. So again, can't thank you guys enough. Can't thank all of you who've supported these organizations for so many years. It's really made a big difference. So thank you, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Have a good rest of the week and take care.